Welcome, everyone. It's great to see you all. It's nice to see so many people pouring in. Um, I'm Andy Shirting, Kathleen Walker. We're the race directors of SwimRun Cape Cod to be held on September 21st. Um, Many of you are racing, many of you are not, and that's perfectly fine, particularly if you're not that familiar with swim run and you want to learn a bit about this and see what it's about. Kathleen and I stumbled upon swim run years ago, and we personally enjoy it, even though we're triathletes. We really like the atmosphere of the races and the challenge of running and swimming multiple times. We especially like not having to lug a bike to the race and back afterwards. But anyways, we're very fortunate today to have Chris Douglas to be our speaker. Chris is one of the two Low Tide Boys. If you're not familiar with the Low Tide Boys, do a Google search after this and enjoy their website and maybe even download some podcasts to your iPhone or your cell phone. Um, they'll really come in handy on runs. It's a wonderful, enjoyable way to to listen and slowly learn all about the swim run community and about the races and about this sport. You have anything, Kathleen?
No, I think that you said it. Thank you all for being on tonight. We're really looking forward to Chris talking, and he'll take over in just a second. So thanks much, and we do appreciate you guys keeping your mute on. So much appreciated. Chris, do you want to jump in?
Sure. First of all, thank you so much for inviting me. Happy to be here. I talk about swim run and think about swim run all the time, so it's just natural for me to do it in front of people. So thank you for the opportunity. I'm also racing SwimRun Cape Cod. Tried to do it last year, it didn't really work out. So happy to be going back. I spent my formative years in Somerville, so spent a lot of time on the Cape. So very, very excited for this race. I see a bunch of people in the Zoom call that I know already. So welcome. Good to see you again. For those that I don't, make sure to say hi to me at the race. What I really want to cover is essentially for anyone who's new to swim run or has some trepidation around swim run, just kind of cover the basics of the sport, talk about gear, which is my favorite topic, and then just basically just answer whatever questions you have. I think my goal, and as well for Andy and Kathleen's, is to have you show up at the start line feeling as prepared as possible for the experience and not have it be some sort of ordeal where you're just full of trepidation and anxiety, and just have it be ready for the adventure. And I think, there's plenty of time to train for this thing. There's plenty of time to get your gear sorted out. There's plenty of time to practice. So we'll cover all of that. But I think I guess just starting with, what is swim run? It's essentially a teams or solo sport where you move across nature, alternating between swimming and running. You swim in your shoes, you run in your wetsuit. If you're a team, you may or may not use a tether if you want. There's pool buoys involved. There's all sorts of gear. And it's essentially, as someone who's also, I consider myself a recovering triathlete, it's just such a great way to experience nature, a great way to express your fitness. So if you're already training as a triathlete, you're well suited for this. If you're already participating in Andy and Kathleen's events, you're basically ready now to do this. I think one of the big misconceptions about swim run is that let's say the race is like 10 miles long, you need to be able to swim 10 miles or run 10 miles. It really doesn't work that way. I think if the longest run is 5K, for example, as long as you can cover that distance in one shot, the alternating between swimming and running it really doesn't feel like you've ran 10 miles if the longest run is 3 miles. It really feels like, with the breaks of swimming in between, you kind of don't have this sort of cumulative effect on your legs and stuff like that. With swim run, the biggest thing that causes fear for people is the swims, right? Most of us can run. If you're feeling tired on a run, you can just like stop. If you're swimming, you'll be crossing a body of water. You'll be doing, depending on the race for SwimRun Cape Cod, you're going to be in ponds, so nothing, no open water swims or nothing super crazy like that. And it's really just getting yourself comfortable with the environment and comfortable with the distance. So for SwimRun Cape Cod. I think the longest, Andy, correct me if I'm wrong, the longest swim is like 800 yards, 700 yards, something like that.
I
I
think
have
you're
that
about
right.
right. We may have one that gets closer to 1,000, but
Okay, so perfect, perfect. So if your longest swim in the race is 1,000 yards, making sure you can swim that in one clip would be sort of like the minimum requirement, so that you can have a good experience. Now, again, you're going to be wearing a wetsuit, or you at least have a pull buoy or some sort of flotation. So, no one's going to drown, no one's going to sink, everything's going to be fine. It's just, you just want to open water swim rules, sight often, head, try to swim as straight as possible and you'll get to the other side. And there's this magic in swim run, which if you're new to the sport, you'll certainly experience. If you're already done some events, and I see Sarah and Emily on the call, I know they've done events. Once you do that first transition, it's this magical thing happens where you're just like, oh, well, that was a crazy thing. I just ran into a body of water, swam across it, and just kept on running when I got to the other side. It's really just such a fun way to experience nature and to kind of just like check things out in a very different way. And I think if there's a pro tip in sort of experiencing swim run is to sort of acquiesce to your environment. And what I mean by that is don't fight what nature is giving you. The best way to move through nature is to be sort of in conversation with it and sort of accept what it gives you. So, if it's cold, dress warm. If it's hot, make sure you have layers, so you can take off. Do what you need to do to not fight the elements, but be in conversation with them, and that usually leads to just a super pleasant experience and an adventure. Whether you're trying to win or just trying to finish or whatever, anything in between, that sort of frees you up to have what we on the show call, achieving your swim run flow state, where you get in this thing where you're not swimming and then running and then swimming and then running, you're swim running, and it becomes like one event. And part of that is transition. So I'm going to spend just a little bit of time on that, and then I'm going to pause and open it up for any questions that people have before we get into gear, which is, just such a fun part of this whole thing for me. Swim run transitions is essentially, when you go from running to swimming or from swimming to running, pretty straightforward. Now, while that seems simple, there are a lot of little steps, little things you got to fiddle with to make those transitions as seamless as possible. You can imagine, I mean, SwimRun Cape Cod isn't a super long race, but you can imagine if you're spending 4 to 5 minutes at each transition, even at SwimRun Cape Cod, that would add almost like an hour of your day. So if you can sort of be smart about that, practice your transitions, practice what you're going to do before you get there, have a plan. Those things can help make the experience much better because there's so many things going on in a swim run. What are you going to do with your cap? What are you doing with your goggles? What are you doing with your hand paddles, your pull buoy, zip up your wetsuit, like whatever you need to do. As much as you can put that kind of on autopilot, it sort of frees up some of that mental energy to just kind of be in the environment and sort of enjoy what you're doing. But I think I'll pause there and see if any has questions. You can use a little hand raise thing or just unmute yourself and ask away if you have any questions.
yes, we've got a chat feature on the Zoom for those who aren't familiar. They can go there. It's at the bottom of your screen. If you see a raise hand, please do that, and we'll try to recognize you and put you in. All right, so we'll start off with Amy, who's raised her hand. Amy, you want to unmute yourself and join us?
Yeah, hi. Great to be here. Um, I've done swim run before, but the thing I haven't cracked, which might be part of equipment, it also might just be part of transition, is I get super sweaty and so like my swim cap doesn't stay put on my head. So any hacks for that? Because
That
I'd
is
like to keep it on.
That is a good one. I have a lot of hair, so I have the same problem. I also have to put a lot of product in my hair because I have a lot of hair. So it's very easy for the cap to slip off. I mean, I don't know if I have a good pro tip there, except maybe wear two swim caps. One, depending what Andy and Kathleen provide, some of the ones can be like extra silicone and kind of you can have some that are more rubbery. The more rubbery ones tend to stay on, so you might want to just wear a swim cap underneath. That sort of will cause a little bit of friction there. Again, if it gets hot though, two swim caps just like ups the heat coefficient there. So maybe it's taking your swim cap off during the runs and just kind of let your kind of head kind of like dry off on the runs maybe, and then put the swim cap on before the swims. But yeah, that's a thorny one. I don't have a good answer, unfortunately.
Yeah, our swim caps are latex, so just to make sure for anybody to be
Gotcha.
aware. So
Yeah.
far, we haven't had any come off, or we haven't seen any that have come off in our other swim run type of races that we had had before. Um, but you never know.
Yeah.
That happens.
If so, as long as people let us know ahead of time if they have their own cap that works for them. Sometimes people with big hair will buy one of those big hair swim caps, and as long as we know, I think any color but the color of the buoys,
Right. No
right?
orange or we'll have yellow buoys out there too.
Yellow will be the finish of each swim leg, and orange will be the any waypoints along the way. Um, uh, for some of the swims, particularly you have one that's a dog leg, kind of a curve as you swim around a point. We'll have some orange buoys for sighting, and we'll also have a rule that you stay uh, close to that buoy as you go through. That that saves us having people scattered all over the pond. So
Right. So
that's our
yeah, so
plan
as long
there.
as you're not wearing an orange swim buoy, because there are the not swim buoy, swim cap. There are the swim caps that are good for like ponytails and things like that. That might give you a little bit more room to it might actually stay on your head better.
Yeah, yeah. Um, there's a number of people who were not able to attend today, but they've given me a list of questions. One has to do is a lot of people are having trouble figuring out the whole pole buoy thing. Like they're thinking about the pole buoy that they may bring to the swimming pool that their coach says to use
Yeah.
sparingly. Um, and but in swim run, Chris, right? It's a bit of a different way of
Yes.
viewing the pole buoy.
This is my favorite topic, which my swimmer partner and I, Chipper, called pull buoy science, which isn't really science. But yeah, so pull buoys in swim run, it's not pool swimming pull buoys where the OG, our first swim run we did back in 2018, we used these little guys and we put some cords in them to sort of strap them to your hips, and this was sort of like the best technology for the time. Provides very little flotation, very good in the pool because you're not kitted up with shoes and socks and wetsuits and all sorts of drag. So what we find is something bigger is better because you have to think about the fact that you are going to be swimming with shoes on, which creates an incredible amount of drag. Even if you have perfect alignment in the water, without any gear, as soon as you put gear on, your feet will start sinking down and you'll just be like an anchor trying to go through there. So what we recommend is essentially a larger pull buoy. So you can tell the difference right here. I brought all of it. So, the difference isn't just in size, it's in sort of density and buoyancy. So this thing, this is a life preserver. Like if you're having a tough time in a swim and you just need a rest, just like sit on your pull buoy and you'll just be like bobbing along at the top of the water. I mean, these things provide a super amount of lift, and essentially what it does when it's between your legs, it sort of counteracts all the drag that you're creating by swimming with shoes and having your full kit on. And it just unlocks your ability to move faster in the water. When you pair the pool buoy with hand paddles, um, you're essentially have hit what is considered like the state of the sport in terms of like your spec for a swim run kit. So and the reason that is it's like because you're not kicking while you're swimming, the pull buoy keeps you in good alignment, and then the hand paddles is really what helps you with your forward propulsion. Hand paddles come in a bunch of different shapes and sizes, different materials. We love carbon fiber paddles because they're ridiculous, but also really stiff and make you faster. But any paddle will do. Any paddle that you're using for your pool swimming, for instance, it's probably a good option. The problem, you might see a bunch of swimrun videos and people using like giant trash can lid paddles. The people that are using those are either crazy or have really strong shoulders and know exactly what they're doing. So it's really important to use a paddle that's appropriate for your strength and for your skill level. So you don't want to, the bigger the paddle, the better. That's not necessarily the case. You want the paddle that's going to make you the fastest. So for example, you know, my partner Chipper and I, we do a bunch of swimming and, we're pretty strong overall. We're still using medium-sized paddles, so like a very sort of average pedestrian size, because when we go bigger, it slows down your stroke rate. It creates a lot more stress on your shoulder. And we found that the medium size is just perfect for us. It's, sort of that Goldilocks where we're getting all the propulsion we want, we're getting the speed advantage that we want, but we're not like sort of destroying our shoulders in the process.
We have a question that came in from chat. Kathleen, can you read it?
Sure. Amy writes, are there any entrances? This is actually, I think, more for Andy than anybody else. Are there any entrances or exits that you know, and what she's referring to, I'm assuming, SwimRun Cape Cod, that you know are trickier to see? I know we have them marked, but
The way that our course is marked or will be marked this year is with hundreds of those kind of little stake flags, like you may see a utility.
Yeah, I think she's talking
put
about the
in.
water, right?
Right, but I mean that's going to lead you right up to the water's
Okay.
edge. And so Kathleen and I did a swim run just last month in Indiana, and they're using that same technique as well. And we think it's a great idea because it's almost like a little bunny trail that you just follow your way to it. Luckily, almost all of our entrances and exits are sandy and smooth, not clambering down rocks, which is very frequent in swim run. Um, we do have one. It's Higgins Pond, which would be the third pond, where you'll have to be a little careful of your footing entering because there are roots for some of the vegetation. And but basically, no, not as much of a problem there.
Okay. Chris, here's a question for you. Amy again. Amy, you've got great questions.
Love
Um,
it.
she writes, I haven't looked up a good training plan for transition from no paddle to small to medium. Worried about shoulder injury and haven't done my homework on this, but are there any open to suggestions?
Yeah, well, I would suggest, I don't have the episode number off the top of my head, but a couple years ago we did a whole episode on swim run, on paddles for swim run, and we had Purple Patch coach John Stevens, who is from Maine and just like probably the fastest swim runner in America in the water. Basically walk us through exactly that question because again, it does you no service to get injured training for a swim run because you're trying to ramp up your paddle size. I would say like if you're super worried about it, don't use paddles. I think the pull buoy to minimize the drag is good enough on its own. And in terms of sort of like a training plan, essentially start small, build it into your pool swimming. And then if you're training specifically for swim run, over time, increasing your use of paddles and pool buoy in the water. So for example, I'm not training for triathlon. All my swim training is directed towards either just regular open water swimming or swim run swimming. So I swim on average maybe 3,000 to 4,000 yards per swim. And maybe about half of that, I'm using paddles and pool buoy in some combination just to make sure I'm keeping the strength or developing the strength. But that's something I built up for. When I first started, it was, maybe like a couple hundred yards with paddles and then just kept building up from there until I developed the strength and sort of like the musculature to handle it.
Yeah, I haven't found that paddle episode yet, and I'm back to 2023. But only a couple of months ago, Chris, you did an episode on carbon fiber paddles,
Yeah,
and maybe you could tell us a little bit about uh,
happy to.
what, what's the story
Happy to.
there? Is it worth the money?
Yes, so carbon fiber paddles are really interesting because they're just so ridiculously stiff. It's essentially turning your hand into an oar. And the way they're designed is they have very little flex, or little to no flex. So what you lose is sort of feel for the water, but what you gain is just an incredible amount of propulsion. So I mean, I think it's worth the money. At some point, it's like I'm sure this is the same for all you triathletes out there. At some point you run out of things to spend money on. So what's left? Carbon fiber paddles. certainly not essential for a good swim run experience. I think if you're trying to qualify for the world championship or something like that, it makes a huge difference just because they're so light. It almost feels lighter than having anything on because you have something on, but it just feels so incredibly light. It almost feels like you don't have anything on, or lighter than you would if you were just swimming normally, which is kind of counterintuitive, but we found that to be true. And yeah, I mean, it's a nice thing, totally optional. I think any paddle that you're using in the pool, like a Stroke Master or any sort of like plastic paddle, is totally fine. It's totally fine. And again, it's mostly just making sure you have a size that's appropriate. And yeah, I'll find that old show. I think it's, who knows, it might have
January
even been 2020. So
January 13th, 2022. Swim run episode number 201.
there you go.
Swim
Thank you.
paddle hieroglyphics.
Oh, well, that's a different one.
Oh, that's a
So,
different one.
so
Oh,
here's the thing. When you have a podcast on swim run and there's only like 9 swim runs in America and the rest are all overseas, you kind of have to go into the minutia just to like fill content. So we did a whole episode on how to write up your paddles, which is a recommendation that we have for swim runners, because when you're in these races, you might not know exactly where you are. It's helpful to have a leg by leg breakdown of what's coming up. So if you know there's a long run coming up, you'll see it on your paddles and you can sort of decide what you want to do one way or another in terms of like capping down your suit, which we'll talk about later, or just making sure you're ready for what might be coming up. You can write where the aid stations are. You can do all sorts of things, important information. So yeah, that's that episode. Andy, we need to go like way back. Hold on a second. I'm sure I can find
Wait,
it
so
real quick.
while you're looking for that, Chris, can you answer a question for me?
Of
The
course.
paddles, you were just talking about your paddles, and like I've seen the other races that we've done, everyone's got their notes like for, what segments they remember what they're doing. What is being used on that so that way it doesn't come off in the water, but yet you can get rid of the writing for the next race? What kind of marker is it?
Yeah. So you essentially just use a Sharpie.
So how do you get that back off for the next race though?
You use a nail polish remover.
Ah, there we go.
Which is one of the problems with the carbon fiber paddles is that they can have a little bit of texture on them, which actually makes them faster. It's almost like the golf ball technology. Um, it makes it hard to come off. So something to be mindful of. But yeah, your regular plastic paddles, just use a Sharpie and then just use nail polish remover or acetone or whatever to take it off afterwards. Andy, the episode that I was thinking about was actually the Gear Talk
October.
episode that came out on September 29th, 2020. So between episode 28 and 29, so 28.5. This was when during COVID, when we had a lot more time on our hands and we were releasing 2 episodes a week when we would do like a gear talk show. But those days are long gone. Too busy now.
That's nice that you were doing wishful thinking during COVID.
Exactly.
Kathleen,
All
some
right. So
questions.
we have a number of questions. Chris, actually this one will give you a rest for a second is for Andy. Um, as a Wellfleet person, she's aware of the poison ivy. You didn't mention, Vanessa, anything about all of the mosquitoes that have been out this spring, so I appreciate that. But the question was for the poison ivy that ends up being like on the trail and going into the water
Two things Wellfleet are known for is poison ivy and mosquitoes.
and ticks.
Yeah,
Ticks.
ticks haven't been as
But
bad in
it's the
recent years,
woods,
but
so what
yeah,
do you,
it is.
like that's kind of what you get.
Um, there is a little bit of single track in the race, particularly in the first 3 miles. Um, but it isn't overt. You're not running through deep.
Right. There it is a
I
trail.
can't imagine you're getting poison ivy unless you go off the trail because you want and you're setting your things down because you just need to get them in order and you're got your hands in poison ivy. So be careful of that. But most of the trails are Jeep trails. That is, they're wide enough for a car or at least a Jeep to go through. And there are a few that are single track early on in the event and also at the tail end for a little while coming out of Dyer
Right.
on toward the finish line. There's a short stretch. And then ticks, uh, check yourself after, and mosquitoes. Mosquitoes were really bad about 3 years ago. And luckily, a tremendous effort by the state brought down the mosquitoes last year wasn't very bad comparatively. However, there is a lot of fear this year that the mosquitoes are going to come back with a vengeance, and we did notice it last weekend. So uh,
Yeah, but
spray yourself up before the race.
right,
Yeah.
right. The and also with ticks or poison ivy, you're getting in and out of the water, so your body is getting washed off. So so you won't have as much. We have not had anyone that's had poison ivy or ticks after any of our other events that have been in the same area that require running on trails and then jumping in the water at some point. So that's been good. Here's a question for you, Chris. What do you do with the safety buoy during the run segments?
Well, that's a very good question. I've never done a solo swim run before, so I've never had to use a safety buoy. But what I anticipate doing is if I can't get like a waiver or something to not have to use one is or get like a borrow someone's rest tube or something is to essentially just carry it like a football.
Yeah, and that's what we've done. As a condition of our conversations with the permitting authorities, we are asking solo athletes to have a safety buoy, but not teams. However, we may be supplying to teams rest tubes, one rest tube per team, just in case there's, an emergency out there.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think some of that Andy and Kathleen, we've talked about this offline is, the permitting agencies, I mean, they don't know anything about the sport either, right? So they see certain things and I remember we had a conversation about the tether and and the permitting agencies that wasn't that like a risk? I was like it's actually the opposite. It keeps people in contact. But it's just an education process that everyone's going through and same thing with triathlon back in the day, right?
Yeah.
The tether keeps me on a straight line because I have someone behind me who knows how to yank that
Oh,
thing
he's
hard.
yanking them over. Yeah.
Okay.
So the next question is about water temp. So this goes back to you, Andy. What we would guess the water temperature to be in September.
It was amazing that it was 73 degrees on
The other day.
Saturday. Here it is early June. It'll be about the same in late September. Could be a little bit more, a little bit less, but it's in that comfortable range. We're not talking about 65 or even what?
Wow.
What's the coldest you've been in, Chris? 50 something?
51, I'd say.
Oh,
And
Okay.
I'll tell you the difference between 51 and 54, it's very noticeable. So yeah, I think it might even be like non-wetsuit wear your tri-suit or something type water temps.
Yeah.
yeah. So that we're back to we keep going back and forth between Chris and Andy. Billy asks, are there groups in the Outer Cape that are training together for swim run? She does a lot of swimming in Eastham very early in the morning, but would love to meet with others that are doing the same.
I know not everyone's on Facebook anymore, but we do have a Facebook group, and I think it's a great idea. We should probably throw that out there and see what we can put together. We did do a scout of the course, and we had about 15 people join us a couple months ago. But Kathleen and I are unable to do a lot of training at this time of the year because of all the races that we're putting on. So we we still could get involved in something, I think, if
Right.
it's the right
And
weekend.
right. And if someone is on Facebook, we do have the swim run Cape Cod group.
That's what I'm thinking. Yeah, that the
Right.
SwimRun Cape Cod Facebook group. Put the question out there, or I'll look at my schedule and maybe I can organize something. Because there are a lot of people who've asked about that, and it would be wonderful to get some things going on a regular basis.
Right. It was fun last time when we did that. It was like the day after the race was supposed to have happened last year, and it was a beautiful day. Um, so that was a lot of fun. I can see us doing that in August. We have races that, 5 more races left for the season, which really limits us. But if you put something, if you are on Facebook, you put something in the SwimRun Cape Cod group and say, hey, I'm going to be on the Cape, on whatever day, then you might be able to find some other people. It looks like
That's right.
Emily St. Germain
Yeah.
just put something in chat saying that she's often in Eastham. So that is one fantastic person to be able to train with. So thanks for
For
offering.
sure. And I think one thing I'll add to that in terms of your swim run training is, the best thing you can do, it's like you don't need to be doing monster swims and monster runs. What will be most helpful for a race of this distance, whether you're doing the short course or the medium course, is really practicing your transition. So, run for half a mile, swim for a couple of 100 yards, just do the ins and outs, practice, what motion you're going to do, like putting the pool buoy. We have some YouTube videos on how to transition step by step that you can check out on our YouTube channel. We just have a tons of content, but yeah, for a race like this, you don't need to do any crazy ocean swims or anything like that. I think really just practicing sort of the mechanics of what you're going to do on race days was going to serve you well, and then save your sort of like training for the pool and things like that.
And one of the wonderful things about Wellfleet and Churro is the atmosphere is such that um, when you take a little run along some of those trails and you see a few people with binoculars who are birding, and you go a little further and you see an artist who's doing artwork, and you go a little further and you see some gentleman with a 4 foot long beard hollowing out a tree trunk for a canoe. No one minds when some Yahoo goes running by them in a wetsuit, dragging the pole buoy and with their swim
They're
goggles and
getting used
everything
to
like
it.
Yeah.
that.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's
Yeah, I mean, in
that's
my
the benefit.
experience, there's three reactions when people see a swim runner. One, they think you're a Navy SEAL, which is pretty badass. They're like, oh, who's this person, right? Two, they're just like utterly confused and leave you alone. Or three, they stop you and they ask you, what are you doing? So, if you get any of those, you should know what to do.
Good.
All right, we've got a few more questions, Chris. So from Steve, he asked, if we plan to race with a pull buoy, does it make sense to do all of our training with pull buoy, or should you mix it up?
Well, that's a good question. I think for all your swim run training, yes, do a pull buoy, use the paddles, basically train as practice for race day in your practice. For pool swimming, it's good to mix it up. I think, the advice that we got years ago is you should try to just become a better swimmer. And that means having good technique and having good body alignment and all this stuff. And that's, when you have a pull buoy and paddles, kind of is cheating. I mean, I love that type of cheating because it just makes me like, I think I'm like 10 seconds per 100 faster when I have all the gear on, which I'll take any day. But if you're just trying to become like a better swimmer, you have to mix it up. You have to do different strokes. You have to do the drills. You have to do all that stuff. But I would say for your swim run specific stuff, especially if you're doing like a swim run training, have all your gear, have all your kit kind of, and work through that, because your familiarity with that is going to pay dividends on race day. Again, like there's so many moving parts that you can just start like fiddling with stuff, and then you forget to zip up your wetsuit, then you jump in the water and it's cold, and then you got to stop, or you forgot to put your goggles on, or there's all these little things that happen. I mean, it even happens to us. Like we just did a race a couple weeks ago, and Chipper's like, "Are you ready?" And I'm like, "I'm ready, but your pool buoy, you don't have your pool buoy in yet." He's like, "Oh, okay, my bad." So even for us who've done like a whole bunch of races, like it's still a process of practice and iteration.
Oh,
Great.
great. All right, thank you. And then here's a question for Rebecca. Chris, this is for you. Would you mind explaining to a total novice at this, seasoned open water swimmer and triathlete, but not swim run, what exactly a swim run is like? This could bleed into gears. We've covered some of that, but I'd love to know what transitions involve the basics, how one can take
Sure.
a minimalist approach to gear. Is there such thing as a minimalist approach to
Yes.
gear for swim run? I didn't.
Totally. So I think having a minimalist approach is best. I think you should not come, super loaded up with all sorts of stuff. I think you need to find what works and then just stick with that. And that doesn't mean having a lot of stuff. So for swim run, and I guess the best way to describe it is like amphibious trail running. right? So for, if you've done any trail running and you've been running around the lake, it's the same thing, except when you hit the lake, you're just going to go straight across it or around it or, hug the shoreline or whatever. So if that helps kind of like conceptualize what it is, it's helpful. In terms of the minimal kit, which we can talk about now, if that makes sense. It's essentially like 5 pieces. Obviously, it's your shoes, which is an important one. Pretty much any trail shoe would work, but you want something that's going to drain well so that you don't get like that when you're running too much. A really good shoe, which is now you can get them on clearance, is this Adidas Terrex Speed Ultra Trail. 240 is sort of the number on the side, 210 for women's. This is a great shoe. Adidas has no idea that they essentially created one of the greatest swimrun shoes ever. Like really, they have no idea. We've tried to tell them, and we can't even get to someone in Germany to be like, hey, by the way, like we've been giving awards to your shoe, and like you don't even give a crap. But it's a great shoe. But basically, since most of the races are on trails, you want something with some lugs of some kind. For SwimRun Cape Cod, it's nothing that's going to be so ridiculously technical or you need like really sort of huge lugs. So any shoe will do. If you don't have a trail shoe, you'd probably be fine in a road shoe. But you really want to index to something a little bit more of a minimal upper that drains really well. And you can just test that. You can get a bucket of water, put your shoes, put your shoes on, step in the bucket, and then go for a run and see how that works out for you. Pairing with the shoes, and this is a question we get a lot, and it's literally something we've never experienced, is blistering from running in wet shoes. And maybe the reason that hasn't happened is because it's a myth. It also might be because we're using very thin, high nylon, high synthetic fiber socks that essentially creates like a second skin around your foot. So nothing like cotton, no like, Nike cotton tube socks. That's a terrible idea. Or something that's heavily wool, unless it's like merino wool. You just want something really light and synthetic, high nylon, high polyester content. Emily mentioned it earlier. We like wearing knee-high socks, but you can wear any socks. But the good thing about knee-high socks, when swim run, there could be some bushwhacking. Entrance and exits might be a little rocky or whatever. So knee-high socks just kind of helps with like the nicks and cuts and stuff like that. But the main advantage of the knee-high socks is it prevents a lot of kind of gunk from getting into your socks and shoes. So you don't get like a lot of sand or a lot of little rocks and stuff like inside your socks, which you definitely don't want. Sometimes you get them in your shoes and that's unavoidable. Maybe you'll have to stop and dump them out, but you don't want them in your sock because that's the type of stuff that can create friction and then they create blisters. Moving up from the kit, then you essentially have your wetsuit. There's very specific swimrun wetsuits, and that technology has really evolved just in the last like 5 years, which is super exciting. And the way suits look now, unlike a triathlon suit, the zipper's in the front, so you can essentially vent the suit. The bottoms will have sort of a different material that's sort of designed for running, so very little resistance in the hips. Some of the older wetsuits are your triathlon suit. There's a lot of padding on the hips, and that's for buoyancy during the swim leg of the race. Not super helpful in a swim run where you're going in and out and you're essentially just totally fatiguing your hip flexors by having to, fight against your normal running form all the time. So, but the suits are super thin, slightly delicate, unfortunately. Zipper in the front, like I mentioned, so you can sort of open it up and sort of temperature regulate, which in swim run is a little bit of an aside. One of the most important things you can do is really stay on top of temperature regulation, because nothing derails your race than overheating and sort of, and like kind of like vasodilating or getting super, super cold. So what you want to do is really try to like stay in that zone where you're not too hot, you're not too cold. And the way you do that is just by trying to mitigate as much heat as you can and vent. So if it's a hot day or the water's warm, as soon as you get out of the water, first step to cool off is take your swim cap off because you retain a lot of heat. So that's for us is level one. It's like take the swim cap off. Level two is sort of like opening the suit, and as my partner Chipper says, get some air on the radiator. And then step three would be cabin down, where you literally kind of take the top of your suit off and just put it around your waist. Typically, you're running with something underneath. If you want, they make these things that are called kangaroo tops, which allows for extra storage. So if you wanted to put, it's kind of hard to see with because it's black, but it has a bunch of pockets where you can literally stuff gels or whatever else you're going to be carrying. And these can also be paired with arm sleeves. So if it's an extra cold day, you can wear arm sleeves if you want, and usually you can take them on and off. So I usually start races with arm sleeves, and then at some point I realize that they're just not necessary anymore, and I'll take them off and just roll them up and just put them in my suit. Um, Moving up from that, you have your paddles, which we've already talked about, and then obviously swim running, I mean, involves open water swimming. So whatever goggles you're using for triathlon or whatever goggles you feel comfortable with open water swimming, just go with that. Don't overthink that. I think if there's anything to overthink with the goggles is making sure that they're easy to kind of adjust in case they leak in the water. Like you don't have to like take your paddles off and do all this stuff just to get them adjusted. You want to be able to just kind of do it with your fingers. Um, One thing that isn't talked a lot about, but something that was really important to me when I was trying to solve for a particular problem is I need to swim with earplugs because of, the thing where I can get disoriented in cold water. And I tried a bunch of different styles because swim run's a team sport. So I have to be able to communicate with my partner. And I run with like sort of like the silicone ones, and it's sort of this weird sound. You're like in your own echo chamber. It wasn't working well. I couldn't listen to my partner. I could only really hear him if I was like looking at him, which doesn't really work well in swim run where you're usually running front to back or side to side. So I found this company called Surf Ears, and they make essentially their earplugs where it keeps the water out, but allows sound to go in. And there's a bunch of different varieties, a bunch of different knockoffs on Amazon and stuff like that. But I found that swim ears work really great and they're super comfortable. So essentially, the longest race I've done is the World Championship a couple times, which is, you're out there for 10 to 12 hours. Um, Basically put them in and forget them until the end of the race where I take them out. So super comfortable to wear for a long time. And I can communicate with my partner, which in swim run, if you're racing with a partner, the communication piece, the partner piece, which is really one of the funnest part of swim run is really this partner aspect. And one of the most unique features of swim run is the partner aspect. Being able to hear your partner just enhances that. Um, Beyond that, there's a couple little pieces of kit that are important. This is our favorite Two Toms Sport Shield. This is the extreme version. You want to lube up. Probably won't be that big of an issue because the swims are in freshwater lakes for SwimRun Cape Cod. But anytime you're doing sort of saltwater swimming, there's a lot of salt. There's opportunities for chafing. You're wearing a wetsuit for a long time. You want to chafe. You want to lube anywhere where you think you might be chafing or you think you might chafe. And a good way to do that is just in practice. Like if you do an ocean swim, you start chafing up, you'll find where your hot spots are. Sometimes they're suit specific. Sometimes they're just individual specific. The other thing is most of these races are cupless. I'm not sure. I'm assuming this one will be similar. So you want to have some sort of collapsible cup that you can just tuck under your suit to hit the aid stations. If you're thinking about carrying a flask, obviously a soft flask makes sense. But one thing I want to point out is not all flasks are created equal. So whatever you bring in a swim run, you have to carry in and carry out. So if you grab a flask like this, which is super popular for trail running, you can see that the nozzle, the top is just really big. This doesn't collapse well. This will like dig into your side. You'll just be hating life. Trust me on this. So you want to try to index on something that'll have like a smaller nozzle or like a smaller footprint on top that'll make it like easier to fold and won't just be digging into you wherever you're putting it in your kit. Did that even answer the question? I'm not sure. But yeah, so I think like going back to the original thing, I think the minimal kit is you want to have your suit, you want to have your paddles, you want to have your buoy, your shoes and socks, you want to have some gels on you, which you can stuff. Most of the suits have pockets one way or another, someplace, or if a kangaroo top, you can stuff them inside. I stuff gels in my socks because I have knee-high socks, so I just kind of like tuck them down in there and just, pull them out whenever I need to. But yeah, that's that. I think like indexing on the going minimal is a good idea. Again, fewer things to fiddle with, fewer things to forget or drop or leave at an aid station and stuff like that. And I think you want to, it's already going to be complicated enough. You want to just try to make it as uncomplicated as possible.
Kathleen loves her soft flask.
Yeah,
You
I
did a
do.
lot of research.
But also coupled with that is the kangaroo top. That kangaroo top is worth, every penny because I put all those flasks and all of my little snacks and all that kind of stuff ends up in my suit. So I really love that. We have a number of questions.
Sure.
As you were going on, it was bringing up a bunch of different things. So here's or related things. So the very first one, and I would love to hear your opinion on this. she asked, she said, if you aren't going to wear your shoes while swimming, what do you recommend doing with them? So the first question that I have is, should she really be wearing swim run shoes rather than taking them off at every swim? And if that works, then yeah, what do you do with those shoes besides putting them in your safe swimmer buoy?
Yeah, so I would say I would try to emphasize practicing swimming with shoes, and I think what you'll find it isn't as big of a lift as you think. I mean, sure, we've seen folks who like, they come to a swim, they sit down, take their shoes off, put it in the thing, get in the water and go. And I think when you do that, you're really doing like swimming then running and not swim running. I saw a message earlier of why it's called swim run. Check out episode 22 of the show where we spoke with the person who came up with the name and why that name is what it is. So go deep into our archives, you can see that. But I think if you want to have a swimrun experience, it's really just sort of embracing sort of the weirdness of it, and that includes sort of swimming with shoes. I think if you're dead set on not swimming with shoes, yeah, I think just pull over, put them in your safety buoy, and then when you get out, like yeah, like maybe find like a quick lace system or something to sort it out so you're not wasting a ton of time. And it's like, again, it's less about wasting time because it's all about having a good time and having a great adventure out there. It's more that's like that interruption kind of like takes away from the experience of moving through nature seamlessly.
Many of our athletes, something you didn't know, Chris, or may not be aware of, but many of our athletes have raced in a race that we did for about 4 or 5 years, which was a satellite race of the SOS race from in New York State in
Right.
the Adirondacks, where there was a bike leg and there were multiple swims and runs. And we followed the rules of the SOS race, which was no pull buoys, no paddles for that. And so a lot of people took off their shoes, and
Yeah.
they would
There's a
come
great
in.
there's a great reason for that. If you're swimming with shoes on
Yeah,
without paddles and pull buoy and you're kicking, you're literally going backwards.
yeah,
Like you're literally creating so much drag that you're creating negative propulsion or reverse propulsion, which is why with the pull buoy, you're not using your legs, you're saving your legs for the run type stuff, which is another thing like back in the day. I mean, swim run is kind of wide open. Like if you wanted to use fins, you could totally use fins and then you just have to carry them and, put on fins if you want to do the swims with fins. But if you're using fins, like you're not really recovering from running. So you're essentially, just putting more effort on your legs.
Very good. Thank you, Chris.
Mhm.
Question for Andy, 73 degrees. We can skip the wetsuit, right? Actually, I guess this is a question for you. Have you ever done a swim where the water has been 73 degrees, Chris? I know you're always doing really cold swims.
Yeah, I haven't done one where it's that warm. By virtue of the show and sort of my obsession with swim run, we do have some swim run wetsuits that are specialized for warm weather. There's a suit which is my favorite suit. I think it's like the greatest thing ever. It's called the VIG, and essentially it only has like a very thin neoprene panel on the front on the chest, which helps for buoyancy and a little bit of warmth. But the rest is all sort of like water repellent material, so it's super light, super thin, and good for a lot of conditions. I mean, I've worn this in races where I shouldn't have because it's just so comfortable to race in. And I mean, everything turned out fine. But my anxiety was all over the place, especially the first swim where you go in and the water's super cold and you're just like reliving every bad decision you've ever made in your life, ending with this one. And then it was fine after that. So everything worked out. But yeah, I think like I actually be curious to do this race without a wetsuit because if it is so warm.
all of our races here on the Cape, we have always at least one and often multiple Speedo mans, and that's all they got, and and they do the race, and I think sometimes the winner is a Speedo man.
That's true.
So yeah,
Yeah, sometimes it is.
so
So, but with the wetsuit, I mean, there's other benefits to a wetsuit besides warmth, right? And you've talked about that with buoyancy. Another is having somewhere to stick all your stuff because in swim run, you just have a lot of stuff. There's no way around it. Not just the, pull buoy and and the paddles, but you often have to carry your own, nutrition, and water. We will have water at each of most of the ponds.
And every participant will, a solo participant gets a swim buoy. They can use their own, but if they use ours, there is a pocket in the swim buoy to put.
Right, right, on the inside. But then you've got like this heavy swim buoy that you're trying to carry, like a
Yeah,
football, or sticking it. I stick mine in the back of the part of the bungee that's around me, and I can kind of fit it in there, but not everyone manages that. So would you suggest, so I guess the whole where I was going with that was, do you suggest, look, if you have one piece of equipment, what would it be? Would it be the wetsuit? Would it be a pull buoy? Like if you could only, cost is a factor.
Sure. Sure. I mean, I think from a just a general I think like these water temps kind of make it a little bit of an outlier. I think a wetsuit is the best investment you can make for your swim run experience. Follow that up with a proper pool buoy. Again, because it just makes you faster in the water and it's, enhances the safety. Again, like this is like the Keel Plus. Believe it or not, they make one that's even bigger than this. It's so buoyant. I mean, we did a test in the pool where we try to like jump in and see how deep down we could go. And with this one, like we would even get like below our sort of our chest. And that was jumping off from like the blocks at our local pool. So it wasn't like off a diving board or anything. But yeah, super buoyant. So I would say those two are probably the most important pieces of kit. Again, we used to give the advice of just, oh, you use whatever wetsuit you have in the house, cut off the arms and the legs. But, there's enough used wetsuits out there now. If you go to Facebook, my partner Chipper started what's called the SwimRun Swap Meet, where people are exchanging wetsuits, stuff like that. If you happen to be a men's medium or tall or men's large, we have a bunch of wetsuits here that we loan out. Sometimes get them back, sometimes we don't. But yeah, we have a bunch of options for people to try. And if one of you just wants to try a wetsuit and you're my size or Chipper size, we can just send one out to you to kind of check out and see what that's all about.
great.
Great. Thank you. So a question came up about glasses. Does anyone wear glasses or is it all contacts? How do you handle that?
Yeah, yeah. So it's mixed. So certainly people wear contacts. If you're like me and have trouble touching your eyeballs, it probably took me like 2 years to just finally be able to put contacts in. So I wear contacts during races or long training days. But yeah, people certainly wear glasses. People certainly bring caps and just stuff them in their suits. If you're worried about the heat, you're worried about sun damage and things like that, you'll wear just like a running cap and people just put them on. Same thing with glasses. There's a good friend of ours. His name is we call his name is Flo. Is G Flow is he's from Germany and he does all these races and he wears his like Oakley prescription sunglasses and it's just like before every swim he has a special pocket he kind of tucks them in his kangaroo top, puts his goggles on and then after he sort of dons them and it's just like if you see a swim runner during a race wearing like fat Oakley sunglasses, that's him.
We have a friend who has prescription swim goggles. So they are available. I don't know what brand he uses, but they're out there if someone is
Needs that for
motivated
swimming.
enough. Yeah.
Right. Right.
Yeah, again, if you can't touch your eyeballs, you got to do something.
Right. So there's a question that I can answer. Amy asked about is a first aid kit required? Are you required to carry it during our race? And you are not. So we will have safety people out on the course and certainly a lot of lifeguards that all can help in that general area. Um, all right, got another question this might be for Andy. Let's see. Doing this, so Penelope says, doing the short course. There's no way my shoulders will tolerate paddles. I routinely swim with shoes on and I'm cold tolerant, so I'll wear a tri suit. As a first timer, there to feel out the sport, can I just relax and not overthink this? This is a Chris question.
Totally. Yes. Yes. Don't overthink it. It'll be fine. I think again, if paddles aren't your thing, you don't need them. Again, it's like if you're just out there to have fun and check it out and not trying to break some sort of like swim run speed record or something, there'll certainly be people out there that are going to be doing that. A friend of the show for us, Marcus Barton, is coming. Literally the most experienced swim runner in America is going to be showing up at this. He's going to go as a bat out of hell. Just let him. Don't worry about him. He's going to win the thing. It'll be fine. And the rest of us will just have fun.
We raced with him last month, and he is impressive. But
Yeah, he's
there
amazing.
was the person who came in second to him did not have paddles. I was just amazed at he just went blowing right by me on the water and with no paddles. So paddles,
Yeah, again,
help, but
paddles
they don't
really
have.
just yeah, paddles really mask poor swim technique. So which is why I love pool buoys and paddles. Like it makes me feel like I'm an elite swimmer, but you take all that off, I'm very average. So and it has that effect on a lot of people. If you're a really great swimmer, yeah, paddles are unnecessary.
All right. So, another question from Amy for solos. What's the buoy that we're providing? It's a safe swimmer buoy. We'll just go behind you in the swim. It's a good size. I wish I had one here, but it's bigger than your average swim buoy or safe swimmer buoy. So I hope that helps, Amy. Um, Emily St. Germain has a question comment. Maybe not as relevant to this particular race, but to sport in general. Tips for becoming more tolerant of colder water temps. Go ahead, Chris.
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question. Unfortunately, I don't have some sort of like magic answer other than you just need to get into the element and do what essentially is just like hardening. So if you know you have a cold race coming up, like if you're doing Casco or something like that, or one of the European races, um, you just have to try to get into that element. If you're really not used to cold water, the first time you go in, you sort of get that mammalian reflex where you go in and you sort of constrict and you're like, that's super common, but that's something you can actually train away. The more you do it, the often you get in there, you can do that. And if you can't get in cold water necessarily, you got it in your shower. It's gonna suck, but a little bit of a cold shower can sort of simulate that and at least get you a little bit used to it. And I think the important thing, if you're doing a cold water race and you haven't had a chance to really do the adaptation or the hardening for it, is just take your time on that first swim. Get your head in the water, take some time to put your face in the water and kind of get like the stinging and all that stuff out. Get your heart rate within control, get your breathing in control, and then really get into your swim stroke. Because what you don't want is to just be like hyperventilating while you're trying to swim and just like not having fun. And that's what I meant, sort of like global advice is what can turn swim run into an ordeal is not being prepared for the challenge that you're facing. I mean, swim runs for the most part are challenging, they're difficult, it's kind of a bizarre thing to even be doing. So the more you can sort of be prepared for that, and being prepared on the swim, be prepared for cold water swimming, that's the thing that's going to reduce reduce any incidents of ordeals. I remember when my partner Chipper and I did Casco Bay for the first time in 2018. um, we definitely bit off more than we could chew, and we thought we were prepared, and it definitely helped us for the next races to just like not take that for granted, because towards the end of that race, it kind of turned into an ordeal. And Chipper and I, we were always bantering and just talking nonsense. Like when we stopped talking, we knew it's like, oh, something's going on here, because we both got serious. Um, and since that point, we've just, way more prepared for whatever it is. We know we're doing a cold water race. We'll try to get into cold water as much as possible. Again, just to do that sort of hardening to be ready for what you're going to face.
That's great advice, and we do have the short course race, and we have a number of quite a few people registered for that race who have asked me about. Well, yes, I did do a sprint triathlon, but I didn't do it that well. Am I going to be okay and all? And um, there's kind of a general rule of thumb, isn't there, Chris, as far as if you're just doing your swimming in a pool, don't think that, oh, by knocking off 800 yards in a workout in the pool, you'll be fine for an open water swim of 800 yards. So you need to be a little bit better prepared than that. No.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. I mean, I think anytime you're swimming in open water, yeah, like pool swimming is great for developing your technique, developing your speed, developing your endurance, but nothing really simulates actually swimming in open water for working on your sighting, swimming straight, all things that are very crucial for swim run. Like, if it's a long swim, the last thing you want to do is kind of take some weird line and you add a couple hundred yards to your swim. So swimming straight's really important. Really, though, I mean, you can kind of practice that in the pool, but it's, when you got to do a flip turn, every 25 yards, it's a little bit harder to do. So yeah, nothing is going to replace you swimming in open water. Again, you don't have to swim 800 yards in open water to get that adaptation or to practice that. It can be shorter swims, but really just kind of being in that element is what's going to help you.
One of our athletes who is going to watch this on YouTube, and there's a quick side note to everybody. If you wanted to repeat some of this, this recording will be placed on YouTube, and you'll see the link we'll send out. Um, Asked, what's the deal about this hole drilling holes in the shoe thing? which which I did because my speed goats they drain pretty well, but not as well as I wanted. So I did drain some small holes to help them. But what do you think, Chris? When does it make sense, if ever?
Yeah, I mean, I think if you have a decent upper that has good drainage, and again, easy to test this at home, just get a bucket, put water in it, put your shoes, go full swim spec from the knees down, and then just soak them in water for a minute or two, go for a run and kind of see how that feels for you. I think that the problem with drilling holes from our experience, and we've never drilled holes from people told us, is like if you drill a hole to let water go out, that could also mean stuff goes in. So you could get sand, you could get, debris of some kind, detritus, whatever. And you just don't want that if you can help it. So, but I think if that's what you need, again, it's not like this race is that crazy long. If you feel like you want to drill some holes in your shoes for extra drainage, I would do that as a last resort after doing the bucket test, just to kind of see where you're at with it.
Oh, great. All right. I've got some things in chat. First, for anyone, earlier we were talking about, I shouldn't say we, Chris was talking about
It's
the
sweet. It's
swim
sweet.
run, swim run SWAT meet. And Amy has put that link in chat if anyone would like to see that. And then there were a few comments, anyone else with issues with sight on the course. Alexandra and Sarah both made some comments about that if anyone wants to go back to it. Okay, so Chris, here's a good question for you. Do you expect the sport of swim run to grow further in the US like triathlon did?
So I have two answers. One is I hope so, because I think it's super fun. And when my partner Chipper and I discovered SwimRun, we knew that this was a great thing. I mean, he and I have been training buddies for a long time. We've done all sorts of endurance experiences together, everything from like turkey trots with our families to 200-mile bike rides to Ironman triathlons, all sorts of stuff. And SwimRun was something we could do together as a team, and we really liked that and enjoyed it. And the level of difficulty was there as well. So if you're, midlife crisising your stuff and you're looking for that next challenge, it sort of checked off a lot of boxes for us. But the reason we kept doing them and didn't just check that box and move on was really the community and just how fun it is, how welcome everyone is. I think anyone on the call who's already done a swim run can attest to just how nice everyone is, how it's really is just like the friendliest sport. And where triathlon can turn into sort of like oh, what's your bike split type thing, and a little bit of a pissing contest in terms of it's just like it's literally an individual time trial every single time. Swim run is not that. Yes, you'll have fast people, but everyone's super friendly and helpful. There's this sort of ethos from adventure racing, which is really about helping each other and being, helping everyone get through. And I think that for those reasons, I really hope that it grows, because it's such a healthy way to experience nature, to care about nature. You start seeing things differently. Like for those of you who got an electric car for the first time, like all of a sudden, like you stop knowing where all the gas stations are. Now you know where electric chargers are. Similar to swim run, like now you're running on trails and you're like, oh, there's a pond. I wonder if there's like a route I can chart. Or, you just start seeing things differently, and what's possible in your endurance just like expands. So it's great. Now, do I think it's going to grow? I hope so. And I think it's, give it up to Andy and Kathleen for taking the risk, for putting on events. I mean, we shout it from the rooftops every single time. We want to grow this thing. We need to support the local races, because not everyone has aspirations of doing the World Championship in Sweden. Not everyone can travel to Switzerland to do a race, or to Malta, or wherever else swim runs are happening. So we need to support the ones here. And there's some really great races in the US. You have the Attila USA Race Series. You have SwimRun North Carolina, SwimRun Lake James. You have the mud skipper races, which are new. You have some local races, all over the place. And it's really about supporting the local races. Like my partner Chipper and I just did Bellingham SwimRun a few weeks ago. And after that race, I pretty much just told him, it's like, hey, any race that's in my time zone, I'm really going to try to make happen, because it's just so important to kind of help it grow by building the base. So people, it's like the Kona effect, right? It's like someone sees the Kona broadcast and then they want to make that their journey. They start at their local Hyannis triathlon, right? Like that's where it starts. It doesn't start like going to like Ironman Arizona or some, I mean, maybe for some people, but starts local and then you sort of develop from there. And I think that's just such that's the only way this is going to grow. And I'm optimistic because there's a lot of interest. Our show is super popular. We get a bunch of downloads, all that stuff. People ask us questions all the time. So there is a lot of interest. It's just a matter of translating that into supporting races, having races sell out like SwimRun Cape Cod. I mean, when I heard that, I'm just like, thank goodness, right? Because that's what we need. We need the interest to be there to support the race directors who essentially crowdfund all these events to make them sustainable.
Thank you.
Right.
Thanks. Yeah, we appreciate your support tremendously. It's we love
Well, hey, I mean, again, we're on the same side with a lot of this, right? Like you want to put on awesome events. I want people to experience awesome events, and I want people to get to the start line to have a great experience. And you want people to have a safe and awesome experience so they come back. So in many ways, like we're trying to hit the same end and having people have just a great endurance experience out there.
Well, there's a lot of triathletes watching this who are going to become swim runners, I think. So,
it. They should.
Well, and the thing is, it doesn't have to be either or, right? If you're training heavily for swim run, you're already trained up for, I mean, excuse me, if you're already training for triathlon, swimming, biking, and running, you already have the fitness to do a swim run right now. It's just a matter, it can even be good for you if you have like a big swim run season planned. A swim run could be the perfect thing to kind of get you out of that really type A, got to hit your watts, and to just have an adventure. You have the fitness for it. You can just go explore nature, do something completely random, and have a good time with a friend or by yourself.
right.
Right. The it looks like um it looks like we have a convert. First, Rebecca is like, okay, I'm in. And that is the last of our chat questions. So does anyone else who's out there, thank you all for being on this with us. Does anyone else have any other questions before Chris has the opportunity to kind of get his last thoughts in and that he can instill on us before we part?
Sure. I did see one question from Ernie around the model of the Adidas Terrex shoes. So the ones that I shared, they're the Adidas Terrex Speed Trail Ultras or Speed Ultra Trails. Again, these are discontinued, but you can find them depending on your size, pretty inexpensive. There's a new version that's called the Agravic Speed Terrex Ultra, and there's one that has a carbon plate and one that doesn't. We've just got our hands on those, and we haven't tested them yet, so we can't say. But just from looking at them, they look like they'd be great. The same type of upper with a lot of drainage. So yeah, if you can get them on sale, it's a pretty good investment. They're also just like a great shoe. So I mean, I wear mine just for trail running all the time because I just like them. And it just so happened to also be just an amazing swim run shoe.
Great. Thank you. All right. Anyone? So it looks like that was a chance for anyone else to write in, and I guess no one else has. So we appreciate you being here with us, Chris. We've learned a lot, and I'm sure everyone else on has too. Is there anything else like your parting words for swim run? Besides, hey, have a good time, and you're only racing against yourself anyway, right? But
Yeah.
is there anything else that you should, that you want to leave with us?
Sure. I think that the one thing I always tell folks is to sort of embrace the ambiguity of it. Everything's kind of ish. The distances are a little bit ish. The aid stations might not be exactly where you want them to be. You need to be self-sufficient. You want to do what's called heads up racing and just kind of have your wits about you, but really just embrace sort of like the weirdness of it. And I basically guarantee you'll have a great experience. If you're not going in with some agenda, you're just going in to see what happens and just move through nature, guarantee you'll have a great time.
Right. Um, We have an athletes meeting the Tuesday before SwimRun Cape Cod, and we'll be able to answer a lot of specific questions about the course and about the really we'll cover everything we can, and that will also be handled by Zoom, much in the same way as tonight was.
Right. So that's September 17th. I want to make sure that that everyone that is on this tonight has gone to the Low Tide Boyz podcast. If you haven't yet, you are really missing out on a lot. There's such wealth of information about swim run for several years of podcasts, and Chipper and Chris are always fun and light and explaining things, and they never talk down. If this is your first swim run, they're talking to you in the same way that they do, those that have been doing this forever. Always a wealth of information. Chris, I've actually what was it? There was I think it was the ARC. There was a sports bra that you had two other
Switching.
it was a Swidgen, right? And after that podcast, I was listening to the your female swim runners that were on with you, and they're like, "Oh my gosh, this is like the best thing ever!" And I quickly went ahead and ordered it on my phone while I was listening in the car, and I was not driving at the time. And I was like, "Wow, that is great advice. This is what I need." And so like that's how like everything that you have to say is so um just like right on, like, yes, that's a need I have. There's one of my pain points. I need to take care of that now. And you just gave me the opportunity to do it. So kudos to you. We really appreciate you all being a part of what we do.
Did a question just come streaming in?
Where can we get the t-shirt? Which
Oh,
t-shirt, Penelope? Who is it?
this
Yours?
t-shirt in
Oh,
particular,
yay.
this
Oh,
t-shirt.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, just go to lowtideboys.com with a Z. We have a little store there and stuff like that. And yeah, Kathleen, thank you so much for that feedback. When we started the show, it was essentially because we had all these questions and we couldn't find any of the answers. And our friends, our triathlete buddies were asking us what was going on, and we were explaining it to everyone. And we're like, you know what? Well, we both have a marketing background and stuff like that. So we were like, hey, we could actually be of service to this thing that we really enjoy. And for that reason, we started the show, and now fast forward 4 years later, it's still happening, which is just amazing. And thank everyone who listens. And yeah, if you want to check out the show, give us feedback, check out our memes on Instagram. It's great. So appreciate you all.
there's also a
Thank you.
question about your
Oh,
t-shirt
about mine.
as
This is
well.
so this would have been last year's t-shirt, but we didn't have the race. So you will see a very similar design, if not the same design, for the September race. So you've got to race with
All
us to do it.
participants get one. Yeah.
All
Yeah.
participants. That's right. All right. Thank you so much, Chris. I hope that you have a great night and safe training and racing. And same to all of you that are on our call tonight. All right. Thanks so much. You have a
Thank
great night.
you.
Bye-bye.